The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez, in for Nicole Wallace. Special counsel Jack Smith very rarely speaks publicly. In fact, aside from that announcement of the indictment, what we've heard from Smith regarding this case against the former president has come through filings, legal windows into Smith's mind. Today, the latest glimpse into the special counsel's thinking as the clock is ticking to hear the Supreme Court respond to his request from last week to have it rule on Trump's immunity claim before the D.C. District Court does, a request which Trump's team opposed in a filing yesterday, saying there is no need to rush. In sharp rebuke, Smith shot down that argument by Trump, saying this decision is so consequential that it must be decided without delay. Quote, "The public interest in a prompt resolution of this case favors an immediate, definitive decision by this court. The charges here are of the utmost gravity. This case involves, for the first time in our nation's history, criminal charges against a former president based on his actions while in office. And not just any actions, alleged acts to perpetuate himself in power by frustrating the constitutionally prescribed process for certifying the lawful winner of an election. The nation has a compelling interest in a decision on respondents' claim of immunity from these charges. And if they are to be tried, a resolution by conviction or acquittal without undue delay. As we wait to hear what the nation's highest court will decide, another thing to note from Jack Smith's filing is who is listed on the front page as counsel of record, as well as Smith's counselor. It's a man by the name of Michael Dreeben, who's has the distinction of having argued over 100 cases before the Supreme Court. Politico describes him as a preeminent authority on the court's criminal law doctrines and points out that this isn't the first time Dreeben has helped a special counsel investigating Trump. While Trump was president, Dreeben worked on special counsel Robert Mueller's probe of links between Trump's campaign and Russia. All of this giving us yet another peek into Jack Smith's strategy as he prepares to go to trial against the former president. And that is where we start this hour with former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the U.S. Department of Justice and co-host of MSNBC's Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast, Mary McCord is here with me at the table. The other co-host of Prosecuting Donald Trump, Andrew Weissmann, is back with us, and New York Times editorial board member Mara Gray. All right, let's start with you. What do you think of this filing?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is really useful for people to note is that it was trying to be very even-handed. It said, you know, regardless of what happens at the trial, whether it's a conviction or acquittal, regardless of what you, the Supreme Court, rule on absolute immunity or not, it needs to be decided. Both of those issues need to be decided. Both of those issues are important to the country. And to the election. So it was saying, look, even if you're going to rule against us, even if ultimately the jury were to say that the government hasn't proven its case, it's very much like what we were talking about half an hour ago, which is that's what the rule of law is. And that obviously is important to the country. I would also say there's some irony in the position of Donald Trump, because here he is saying slow everything down, no reason to rush. But, you know, in the other cases where he's like, I need to be on the ballot, he's going to be saying, no, let's speed this up. So he's going to get two very different positions, say very different things to the Supreme Court. Right.
And the motivations, of course, very clear. Yes. I wonder what you think is going on at the Supreme Court right now. What is their incentive to listen to Jack Smith and take up this case before the D.C. District Court does?
Well, what's going on right now is clerks are just frantically reading everything that they can and writing memos for the justices for whom they work and, alerting the justices who, of course, are well aware of what's been filed, of the decisions that need need to be made in short order. And I think that this is complicated to know what the Supreme Court will do. I do think the Supreme Court ultimately will take up this issue, but because the D.C. Circuit has already, issued a very, very expedited schedule for briefing in the circuit, where the first briefs will be due by Donald Trump on Saturday, the government's response by December 30th, Mr. Trump's reply by January 2nd, argument on January 9th. The Supreme Court may very well say, you know what, they're moving so fast, we'll wait and see what the D.C. Circuit says, and then we'll revisit this idea about whether to accept further review. And I think that's what Jack Smith is trying hard to come in with this filing today and say, you can't wait for that because we don't really know how long it will take for the circuit to rule. And these issues ultimately need to be decided by you, Supreme Court. And so unlike other cases where you might let a legal issue percolate in the circuit courts of appeals, sometimes for years, to see how they will decide issues. And eventually, after letting that kind of simmer for a while, one of the cases will rise up to the Supreme Court. What Jack Smith is saying, of course, through Michael Dreeben, counsel of record, former longtime decades deputy solicitor general in the Department of Justice, what he's saying in this filing is, this is the kind of case where you don't wait for that, because this is of such paramount importance for the reasons, that are in those clips that you read in your intro. This is of such paramount importance. It needs to get to the Supreme Court. And like Andrew said, regardless of how they rule, that the case can go forward or that it can't, it needs to get to the Supreme Court and it needs to get there quickly.
Andrew, part of the reason we decided to lead this hour with the story is because we so rarely hear from Jack Smith. And so the fact that we were hearing from him, it felt monumental. Yes. I wonder what you make of his decision to lay this all out so publicly.
Well, this in some ways is his only opportunity because he is not speaking. He is taking what I'll call the Robert Mueller approach to being special counsel, which is you speak through your filings. And as Robert Mueller used to say, you live by the press, you die by the press. He was very tight-lipped. So I think that it is really important that we cover what's being written, and I think they focus very carefully on what's being written. I think that's why you see them talking about the importance to the country and also just how even-handed they're trying to be. To say this isn't about, we want this because we're going to win, or this is the ruling we want. They'll make those arguments, but they're saying it doesn't matter which way you're coming out. It doesn't matter which way the jury comes out in terms of needing to have speed, because this is so important to the electorate, no matter what the decision is. And I think that's precisely what you want our Department of Justice to be doing.
Especially as that timeline gets tighter and tighter. And Mara, to that point, you had Jack Smith sort of reminding folks of the stakes in this filing. He writes, quote, respondents' immunity claim implicates issues that are central to the rule of law. Contrary to respondents' characterization, the indictment alleges serious criminal conduct. That respondent, while serving as president and a candidate for re-election, conspired to thwart the lawful transfer of power. Enforcing federal criminal laws that prohibit such conduct is vital to protecting our constitutional processes and democracy itself. This is urgent.
Yeah, one of the things that I find encouraging about this document is just the sense of awareness that Jack Smith seems to have. Oftentimes you get bureaucrats and lawyers who are brilliant at their jobs, or public servants. They're dotting their I's, they're crossing their T's, but they're not seeing the forest through the trees. They're not remembering why this function of government is important, how Americans may perceive the work that they're doing. And I think the Mueller probe, to a certain extent, did fall victim to that in the public's eye. I think Jack Smith has an acute understanding not only of the importance of the work he's doing, but of the public's perception of it. He also seems to deeply understand the importance for due process for the former president, but also to give the electorate the information that it needs to make an informed decision. So I find it deeply encouraging, actually, and we are less than a year away from an election. So voters deserve as much information as possible before they go into that polling booth.